It's my honour to have these three heroes sitting around me. They didn't.
This is how we always start a conversation with us, by the way.
They didn't have to stay. They could have gone home last night because they did a great show, but they didn't. They stayed, and I'm flattered that they stayed. And I think one of the significant things about these three boys is that they have something very special, and it's called something that's gone missing a lot from our lives. It's called respect, and they have it in abundance. They respect fellow musicians, especially older ones like me, which I am very grateful for. They respect.
Just open your lenders a fiver, John.
I've got it in my top pocket. They respect one another, and they've been on the road pretty seriously this last few years. But best of all, I think they respect the music, and they look after it and care for it, and exactly. And I think that's what touches me most, is the respect for the songs, looking after them, tending them, caring for them, and then showing them out, letting you share with that respect. So I'm flattered, as I said, and I'm honoured to be in the company of three very respectful lads. And
thank you, Johnny. It feels like we're at our funeral here, though. Yeah, and on my left, John Tams.
You notice during this that I'm operating in with my foot. You can't see my lips move, can you?
You don't know where his foot's going.
So here we go. We can talk about the weather. We can talk about all sorts of things. But what I like to know is, we can go into backstories if it goes down that avenue. We can go wherever we want and wherever you want, because you're part of this conversation. I started the conversations of this type in Whitby about 25 years ago. I suggested it to the then gaffer of Whitby that we should just find out more about people than perhaps just standing up and singing. So the first one was with Norma Waterson and Bob Davenport. And it was about an hour and a half, and they got to about 1968 in that time. So they stayed on for a few more mornings and just chatted and shot the breeze. So
we've got some great stories about 1968, John. Oh, yeah.
You were never here. It was a good time. So Teesside, Derbyshire, bit of Staffordshire. It matters to us. I think what happens in the folk scene is we carry our birthright with us, and we try and spread the word. And I know these lads will talk in a moment or two about what they're working on next, which is solidly up the road in the northeast and most definitely around Teesside. And I'm currently co-writing a play about Bess of Hardwick, who was the richest woman in the world at the time of Queen Elizabeth. She was richer than her queen. She was the jailer for Mary Queen of Scots. She started out with 300 acres and ended up with 200,000 acres. So she's quite an important woman. That's what I'm working on. And the lads will talk to me about that, and I want to talk to them about what their next project is. So have you got any questions thus far? Like, what's the weather like in Cologne? No? All right.
Do you like the fact as well, to make this a little bit more relaxed and informal, we've brought on some props with us, some drinks here. And we don't usually drink, but we thought they'd make for quite effective props. So that's what we're doing with those. Just for a bit more informality. Well, maybe, John, you should talk about how you start the whole process, because we were talking in the pub about the dreaded blank page. And you're talking about making a play, and obviously you're synonymous with Warhorse as well. How do you start from nothing and end up with something?
I'm scared by the blank page. It frightens me. So almost always I'll defile it. I'll scribble on it. I'll screw it up. I'll make it look as though I found it somewhere, but it doesn't just stare back at me. So if I'm travelling on the train, and I decide that there's a song that might be happening. The fact that it always comes out in neither in or there, but I write it in the margins of the newspaper I'm reading. And so I've got lots of copies of margin and big adverts that have got lots of blank spaces on. I write it in that. I like to write on something that's not so threatening as a white sheet. And there has to be something before there is something else, like the song. So you've got to make a mark on it. And I think I tend to write now for commissions because I'm lucky that I'm so old that people come to me to make up songs for shows and films and television and so on, radio. And now I find that a lot easier. I think the analogy is if you've got a 4 or 5 year old and they want to paint, so you get the kitchen all covered in newspapers, you put a bib on them, you get the table set up and the paint's on the table, and they want to paint, desperately want to paint, and then they sit down and it all goes quiet, and then they say, "Grandad, I don't know what to paint." And that's a bit like me when I'm trying to write a song.
Do you have your bib on, do you?
I have my bib on.
Paint all over the place. I don't know what he's doing, but he's trying to write a song. Very odd.
It starts from there, really. You know, don't know what to write about. So if somebody tells me what to write about, and we talked about this earlier, Sean's written one of the most wonderful radio ballads pieces for the radio ballad of the Great War. And he even did, you found it hard, didn't you?
Yeah, like you, John. I need to sort of kick up the backside every now and again, just to someone to sort of present a story or something. Yeah, the blank page terrifies me as well, and it's having that sort of inspiration, that hook to suddenly get pen to paper. And I was just saying to John in the pub next door, recently, well, a year ago, in fact, this guy came to one of our concerts, and he said, "My dad came from Stockton-on-Tees, where you come from. This is his story." And he handed us this whole folder of information about his dad, and his dad's name was Johnny Longstaff. And his life just sort of touches some of the great struggles of the 20th century. He grew up in bitter poverty, but he didn't know it was poverty because everyone had the same experience. It was only when he got to London that he realised that some people weren't living the way he did. But when he was 14 years old, he lost his job. He worked in a steelworks. He had an accident. And when he came out of hospital 2 weeks later, they'd given his job to someone else. And so he was unemployed, and he was too young to get the dole. And there were some men milling about the middle of Stockton town centre, and the young 15-year-old Johnny Longstaff went over at them and said, "Oh, what are you doing, lads?" And they said, "Well, we're marching to London. This is a hunger march, and we're going to petition Ramsay MacDonald and the government for work." And he says, "Oh, brilliant, can I come?" And they said, "Well, how old are you?" "I'm 15. "Oh, you can't come, lad, you're too young." But Johnny Longstaff, because he was so stubborn and determined, the hunger march left Stockton, and he followed it, half a mile behind, sleeping rough every night behind bushes under trees, until eventually they got to Leeds and they realised he was following them, and they said, "Oh, of course you can march with us, lad." And they marched all the way down to London, and as they went, you know, people were supporting them. Local doctors were giving up their own time, and this was before the NHS, and giving free prescriptions when they shouldn't have. People, local cobblers were coming out and fixing their boots. And they got to London, and he'd never seen so many people. There was 100,000 people in Hyde Park, and his story went on. He stayed in London. He was sleeping rough on the streets, and then he got quite political, and he was taking part in the mass trespassings of the 1930s, which opened up the way to the right to ramble. When he was 16 years old, he was at the Battle of Cable Street, with 100,000 people standing up to Mosley's black shirts. When he was 17, he lied about his age and went off to fight for democracy in the Spanish Civil War. He was incredible, all the stuff he did before he was 19. But the amazing thing about this guy, Johnny Longstaff, is that before he died in the 1980s, he recorded all of his stories, and we've got 6 hours of his voice telling the story, and it's just fantastic because he delivers it all in this broad Teesside accent, and he just tells it like it is, and he says things like, "There was me. I was only 17, fighting for democracy in Spain. I didn't even know what sex was. I'd never seen a woman in the nip." It's just unbelievable. But just to finish off this little bit, when he eventually got back from Spain and the international brigades were sent back, and you see at the time, you know, Britain was supposed to be neutral in the Spanish Civil War, and people like Johnny were really abused for going out to fight against fascism at the time. And he got back and he went to meet his local MP in the Houses of Commons. And as he was chatting, Winston Churchill comes walking along, and Johnny's MP says, "Oh, Mr. Churchill, can I please introduce you to a young lad, Johnny Longstaff, who's been recently returned from fighting fascism in Spain." And this is 1939. Churchill looks him up and down and says, "Well, lads like you, are you going to be prepared to go out and fight against Hitler?" And Johnny Longstaff, he's only 19, he says to him, "Well, of course, Mr. Churchill, we've been fighting Hitler for 3 years." And it was just this extraordinary moment. And so we were telling John that our sort of idea for this is hopefully at some point in the next couple of years is develop a piece of work that can intersperse the voice of Johnny Longstaff telling these stories in his own words with original songs inspired by those stories. So it's just, I mean, such an incredible honour to be able to hopefully be in a position to do that and to share that great story with people.
I think doing things like the radio ballads and getting oral tradition and oral history gifted to you, you have to tread very gently and carefully and lightly on the life tellers, because without them you've got no journey to make. So it's really important that you give them the respect.
It's kind of the
Common word of
opposite
the day.
of what we do, what you get in films, really. Because there's a tendency in a film, if you take someone's life, is to sensationalise and to dramatise. But really, actually, in a song, you don't have to do that. I'm not a songwriter, but you don't have to. You don't have to do that, because you can bring it out with words. You can just tell their story, and there isn't this weird tendency to say, "Oh, we need more. You know, we need scandal. We need this." You know, you don't need that, because it's just the brilliance of everyday stories.
What's your process, John, for writing songs for the radio ballads, and what do you do with that then?
I think I try and create an atmosphere rather than using the life tellers. There was a word that I railed against, which was vox pop. I don't like the word vox pop, it's demeaning. Life tellers is the choice that I work under. So I might listen to quite a lot of these people's stories, but then I'll go, and my process is research, i.e. listening in this case. In other cases for plays and so on, lots and lots of research, and then a real refusal to put pen to paper that takes as long as it takes. So it's mashing, it's just bedding down in my head, and then really right up to the wire, pushing myself into the corner of where I want to be, and then maybe with any luck a pip will fly out that gives me the journey that I need to make. So I write more about atmospheres. Some of the writers, and some great writers on the radio ballads, including Sean and Jez Lowe from up the same road, they are inspired by the language and the quotes of the people, whereas I try and create an atmosphere either side of that. So I rarely quote from what's been said. But so every song, I wouldn't be able to run a song-making workshop. I don't call myself a songwriter, I'm a song maker, which means I can take a broken song and fix it like it might be an old chair with a wobbly leg. and I take it into the studio or the office or the workshop at the back of my head and turn a new leg for it and then put it back on. Then it can be useful again. You can sit on it and it can go out in the world and be useful.
I love your metaphors, John. When we were in the pub, your analogy for songwriting was bakery. You were saying it's like trying to create an artisan loaf. And then what I found is actually, and it was purely by chance, and I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but instead of making the artisan loaf, I found I'd made a 3-tier wedding cake. And I was absolutely, he's got a chair with a wobbly leg. It's brilliant. This is a songwriter. Never mind a song maker, he's a songwriter.
But it's really interesting and really nice to know, John, that it terrifies you, the idea of explaining how you make songs and doing a workshop. I mean, that idea absolutely petrifies me. I've only ever done one songwriting workshop thing at Whitby, and I was just so more nervous than I've ever been at any gig we've ever done, because it for me it's just it's a very personal thing, creating a song.
And it's unique. It's always different.
Yeah.
It's every time, excuse me, it comes from a different source. It might be just something that crops up. I spent 7 years writing one song, and it's not very good. But I did actually finish it, but it took 7 years to write. The best songs are done in one sitting, because in the chemicals of the human condition, you're a slightly different person when you wake up the following day, just slightly. And if you come back to the page you were working on the night before as a different person, you start to find that you've lost, there's been a break in it. So it's always good to sit, even if you stay up all night long and into the morning, and finish the piece while you've got that same person in your head. Harold Pinter, the great writer, playwright, would write in one go for 36 hours, then he'd sleep. And he wouldn't come back to his work, he'd leave it as it was. And I think that's sort of a lesson to most songmakers and poets. Trish is here. Trish Carrison, award-winning poet, sitting in the audience with us. Birthday today. Round of applause for Trish.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Trish.
Happy birthday, dear Trish. Happy birthday to you.
Trish Carrison.
And now, Johnny would like to present you with an allegorical birthday 3-tier cake.
How long did it take you to write that one, John?
Metaphorically. So it's mystical. As Sean will testify, how songs get made.
Yeah, and I think I always like to, when people ask me, refer to that quote from Alan Bennett, who once said that...
And do the voice, Mr.
The art of writing is... the pleasure of writing is actually writing itself. Not so much... I mean, it's fantastic to share it, and we get so much incredible... emotion out of sharing songs, but that moment when it's just you and it's just the idea and it's just the pen or it's just the tune in your head, there's something unbeatable about that. And it was something like that Alan Bennett once said. But it's just reminded me, we were talking about Dylan in the pub, and that fantastic news this week that Dylan has been awarded the Nobel Prize. I know people have been campaigning for that for decades. And Dylan has been such an inspiration to me. But there was a theory once that because songwriters are often these people who, for the process of writing is so precious and special, someone once suggested, well, maybe Dylan's got even better songs out there that he's never actually released or ever sang. And that always made me really think about things that...
They're selling postcards of the hanging, they're painting the passports brown, the beauty parlours filled with sailors, the circus is in town. Then in comes Romeo, he's moaning, "You belong to me, I believe." And someone says, "You're in the wrong place, my friend, you'd better leave." And all that's left after the ambulances go is Cinderella sweeping up on Desolation Row. Bob Dylan.
Excellent. Your turn, Michael. All right.
John, can I ask you about Warhorse? So Warhorse is, you might be aware of this, Warhorse is coming back to tour again next year. How did you get involved in that? Did you know Michael Mapergo before?
No, I didn't.
Beforehand?
I knew of him, but I'd not yet met him. And I was in the office at the National Theatre, which is also known as the Mulberry Inn, but it's known as my office because that's where I spend my time. It's on upper ground, just behind the National. So where's John? He's in his office. So I said I'd meet these people who wanted to make this play out of Michael's novel in my office. And they all turned up, and it had changed since I was at the National, you know, in the 80s, where people had a drink. So I have a drink, and they all drink miserable water, as I call it, you know. And so I'm already, you know, a bit wayward in their eyes. And then I talk a bit, and then I talk a lot, and then they just go away. And then they say, "Well, you seem to be the man for the job," on one condition, that you do a song called Only Remembered. So I said, "Well, of course we'll do that. It's a terrific song." I'd found it in the Moody and Sankey hymn book. And so I deconstructed it, took out its godliness and its Christian ethos, and just turned it into an anthem, and then I wrote some more verses for it. And they quite liked that. So that became the top and tail of the piece. And we improvised. We would get a few pages of the book, and the actors would improvise a scene out of the pages. We'd have a cup of tea and have a look at it, and then we'd get up and put it on its feet and walk it about, as they say, in the trade. And then there'd come a point when one of the two directors would point at me and say, "Sing something." So then I'd sing something, and occasionally it fitted, and sometimes it didn't. And I remember finding one song that I particularly liked, thought this will do nicely. By then, because we just got paper horses and things like that, by then the puppets had turned up from South Africa, and they broke my heart. And I knew, and just by the brilliance of, you know, the sculptural brilliance of these puppet makers, that we've got something special going. Michael thought it was going to be like pantomime horses when I eventually, you know, with two blokes in a, you know, one with his head up, the other one's bum. But these puppets are absolutely amazing. So when they turned up, and I would sit in the room writing new verses, and there was a window open at one side, and Joey, they hang them on bars, on scaffold poles when they're resting. And there was a window open, and I was writing, and I looked up, and Joey was slowly nodding like this. And I thought, well, that's a keeper. I'll put that lyric in the show. So we made it up as we went along, and I'd found this song that I particularly liked, and we got the horses, and I got to the very most important bit, and it was an old traditional song that I'd remade. And I got to the bit where I think it's a line which is what Joey nodded to, and it says, it's a love letter, and it says, "Because my tunic buttons tight around your heart, a soldier writing to his sweetheart." And I thought, yeah, I just made that up, that'll be good, and that's when Joey nodded. So I got to that bit, which I was looking forward to, and Joey was pottering about. I was sitting on a bucket in the stable at the time. Joey was pottering about, and he came, backed into me, kicked the bucket from underneath me, and then I suddenly realised these aren't being managed, these puppets. They're living souls. They're real. You can't get them to do anything. I was trying to do a section of a song I was doing at the Royal Albert Hall for the Festival of Remembrance. And one of the things I wanted to do was pin poppies onto Joey's harness. Around the top there. Is it his harness? Bridle. Yeah. And I couldn't reach. And the puppeteer said, well, you have to grab his reins and pull him down. I thought, I've been working with these horses for 6 years and I'd not thought about that. I thought, I've got enough on here. At least it can bow his head. So I go, no, he can't, because he's naughty and he does whatever he wants, whenever you want him to, or whenever you don't want him to. So they are remarkable animals. But with their head, hind and heart, 3 puppeteers turn these sculpturally magnificent pieces of craft into real living animals. And the secret why you like it, those of you who've seen it, why you like it so much, is you make your own Joey. You have to work to breathe life into that horse, as well as the puppeteers are helping to make that for you. You make your own Joey. So that's why it's so reciprocal, the work of that play. And that's why it's played to 7 million people. 7 million people. It's the most successful play that's ever been done. It's not a musical, it's just a story. But I'm looking forward, and we've celebrated, the lads and I, that Bob Fox is going to return as songman for the tour, so I'm very proud of that, and good for the local heroes here, you know.
No, that is impressive, 7 million. You're just 100 million away from the amount of people who watched a woman laughing in a Chewbacca mask. So that really puts a spin on it, doesn't it? Yeah.
Reminds me of a good story though, John. When I went down to see it in London and to see Bob, and we'd booked onto the Touch tour before the performance, and the Touch tour was ready for visually impaired people to come along and sort of get a suss out the stage and stuff, and
anything to touch up Bob Fox.
and to sort of feel.
John's not even blind, but he was up there. When I say up there, I really should mean that. Puppeteer.
Was it Songman or Thongman? I don't know. Anyway, so we were there, and there were loads of people on the stage and loads of guide dogs, and people were sort of feeling that getting an impression of what the puppets can do. It was absolutely hilarious because someone said, and this is these are the horses, this is Joy, and you just get a feel of this. And someone said, oh, it's very realistic, isn't it? It's even got a wet nose. And someone next said, sorry, that's a guide dog, actually.
Oh, yes.
They've been terrific. I had to do a thing on, I don't know, a couple of years, 3 years ago, on Oscar's Parade for the B division of the royal family. It was Prince Andrew, I think. Not Prince Andrew. Prince Edward, who quite likes, he's commanding officer of lots of regiments like they all are, and this particular one that he chose was the one that allowed him to wear a frock. So he got a kind of green kilt on, and his lovely wife. And anyway, we did the show. We started to do the show, rehearsing it, and the bandmaster I was gonna sing "Love Farewell," I think, or something like that. I can't remember. And it was the Grenadiers, the Coldstreams, the Scots, the Irish, all the big bands. So there's about 200 band, and the mounted band of the Household Brigade. So all on horses, with 2 great big Shire horses at the end with timpani, and you have to put them on, I was told, simultaneously, or the horse falls over because they're that heavy. And so you have to go 1, 2, 3, 2 lads either side, drop it on the horse. And of course they steer them with their feet so they can play these kettle drums, the timpani. So the bandmaster said, just come out and stand in front of that horse. And I knew, because I'd seen it before, that when Joey comes on, which he did halfway through the song, he's got more legs than they have. Because there's 2 lads inside, he's got his own legs, and a bloke sorting his head out, so it looks a bit weird. So I said, I'm not turning my back on them. And sure enough, when Joey came on, they scarpered. They just buggered off and ran off down the mall with the guy trying to steer him with his feet. And then they found out there was nowhere to go, so they went around Victoria's statue out opposite Buckingham Palace and came back up and sauntered in again and took their places. But it was a bit hairy. So when you introduce them to horses, and we do at the cavalry, and we do with police horses, and when we go around the world, I was in Toronto at the police academy not so long ago, Joey defers, he bends his head to them, and then the horses start to nuzzle him and get to know him. But if he goes in, because he's a bit curious with all the extra legs, and doesn't defer to the horse. So we're learning about horse whispering, I suppose, some of it. But so it's been an honour for this past 7 years now to go all around the world with that particular show. But you've got a show that I want to go and see. You've got the transports. The great Peter Bellamy, God rest him, his play about transportation and migrants. So when do you start rehearsing that?
Soon, hopefully.
It's taking place in January.
Well, it's coming to Derby. Isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah. I've got a list here.
Oh, he's prepared. Look at this.
yeah. Excellent.
Hey?
Picture
Horse
of you,
prepares well for a conversation.
Picture of a horse, I think.
I'm looking forward to Warhorse, the bloopers edition. Excellent.
It's on in Derby on Sunday the 29th at the Guildhall, which is... Oh, good for you. Good for you.
It's crazy.
And there's 2 shows in that day.
There is.
Yeah.
2 shows in Derby. We're delighted and honoured to be able to do it. If you're not familiar with it, the Transports was a sort of groundbreaking piece of work by the late Peter Bellamy. It came out in 1977 and he called it a ballad opera. It's the true story of 2 convicts on the very first fleet that went to Australia who sort of have a love story. And I won't spoil the story or the ending for you, but it's incredible. And it's all told through songs, fantastic songs. So there's loads of wonderful people in the show. Nancy Kerr, Greg Russell, who's here, all the guys from Faustus, but the whole thing has been tied together by a great friend of ours called Matthew Crampton, who's an author, and he's written a fantastic book this year called Human Cargo.
You'll have heard his voice last night if you came to see our gig, narrating the Soldier's Diary before we sang Lapwings.
But I think importantly for us, we sort of knew that we couldn't be involved in a production of the Transports in today's current climate without making any sort of mention of the incredible things that happen in the world today in terms of migration and the refugee crisis. So actually happening alongside the tour is a project that Matthew's thought up called Parallel Lives, and in each of the tour towns we go to, we're going to be sort of researching and sharing stories of migration to that town throughout history and today as well. So hopefully it's going to have a really current feel to it.
I think that's consistent with what you were telling me earlier, with the story of the young man walking all the way to London, going to fight for democracy in Spain, walking on the moors of Derbyshire in 1936 with Benny Rothman as some of the trespassers. You're going to do work with that. You might even do the walk. You might even make the journey that he made all those years ago. And with this, you're not just looking at the middle of it, you're looking at either side of it. And you can't just put a piece up in isolation these days. I don't think it's appropriate. So you need to look at the width of it, never mind the centre of it. And I admire you for that. It's important. Good.
Does anybody come with any questions, by the way? I just realised we're having a lovely time up here.
We
but you
always
might have
do in
come,
every conversation, we widen it out to everybody else in the pub. So.
Bloke over there with a local accent.
Here we go.
It's Mark.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. That's a great idea, isn't it? Sang a song last night about the Battle of Stockton, which was 3 years before Cable Street, when an estimated 2,000 people from our hometown chased a group of the British Union of fascists back across the River Tees, and it's a really good idea. It's sort of our sort of mission, really, to spread the news of that story and
Get one made and just do it guerrilla.
Yeah, that's
Do
what.
a guerrilla installation overnight.
Well,
Get on like
that's what Tony Benn
Yeah.
did, wasn't it, in
Yeah,
the
put
cupboard
one-
in
put one
the
up.
Houses of Parliament? Yeah.
Yeah.
Get Banksy to
Does anyone know who he is?
He's here somewhere.
um,
He's over there, look. Oh, no, it's over there.
But we think it's really important because our towns like ours get an awful lot of stick, and we've got problems, but we've also got a tremendous history and an enormous sense of pride in where we come from.
Is past a really important part of? I know you work very much with your writing as well in the present, but is the past? Someone said, I think it was L.P. Hartley in a book called The Go-Between. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. But I don't believe that, you see. I think we need to carry with us that all that legacy of information and share it out, just so things such as you just mentioned, Sean, don't go missing. Because we can only learn about today by looking over our shoulders about.
Well, it's a
what
stranger
happened.
because I was doing history at school. I always used to think maybe it was a way of sanitizing and desensitizing myself against some of the brutality that you would learn about. I always used to think, oh yeah, but that was in the past, and they were different. And then the difference became when I started, I suppose, getting more involved in folk music, and you suddenly started hearing the songs, and it became more personal. And suddenly I realised that actually that people weren't that different at all, really. So it's interesting sort of learning history and always trying to disassociate and then learning folk music and being forced to associate. I think that's the power of music.
I think you're right, and I think also the historians up to maybe the 60s had an agenda that was establishment driven. So they would tell you histories that were largely empire oriented or imperial in some way. And then along came A.J.P. Taylor, Asa Briggs, Christopher Hill, left-wing historians who started to tell you different truths. Yeah. But all that time, while they were reinventing history and historians, it all resided in the songs. Because we don't know who wrote most of them, but they do tell truths. Yeah. And the honor of what we do for our livings is based on those truths that those songs tell. So we should be so lucky that we've got that legacy of songs to tell, because there's more history in the songs than there is in the history books. So that's a generalization, but largely true.
It's a really interesting conflict that between history and folk songs. I struggle with it. I did a history degree, and I'm sort of trained to think sort of objectively, I suppose. And I do, but in many ways, history it's up for grabs. It's always been subjective. It's always been written with an agenda. And I do fear sometimes when we're writing songs like that, celebrate the Battle of Stockton, and I almost wrote it. It is a sort of, it's an us and them kind of song, and I don't think I really want to write a song like that anymore. I don't want to sort of, people who joined the fascist party in Britain in the 30s, they were proved wrong in the end, and rightly so, completely rightly so. But there's individual stories there, there's individual struggles, and to sort of classify, take an attitude of an us and them, and it is, I don't think it's helpful, especially not in today's climate. So that's almost one of my big sort of struggles as a songwriter, really, and how to tell a story without
table thumping.
Yeah.
Well, I completely agree, because even the one song that I've written for the young'uns, A Lovely Cup of Tea, I feel the same way. There's a line in that which is a song basically about, for anyone who hasn't heard it, about the Muslims of York were basically tarnished because of the killing of Lee Rigby, and the English Defence League put up a protest in York to protest outside a mosque in York, and the Muslim community got together with all the other faith groups and combated this by inviting the EDL protesters in for a cup of tea and a tray of biscuits and a game of football. And so we write a song about this from the perspective of an English Defence League member, and it's meant to be a comedy song, but I don't want to say my darkest hour because that sounds very pretentious, but sometimes I always think, well, we are kind of laughing at people, really, and it's how you approach it. It's like you want to come from it almost embracing people and saying, oh, it's a shame that you feel like this, but let's try and understand why. Yes. And as fun as the song is, and as much as I enjoy singing it, I can't help feeling sometimes that it's not really actually helping.
It's a real positive message, though, isn't it? There's a real.
Well, they may well be, yeah, but
that's the key.
Yeah, but there's that. It's like what Sean's saying. It's that. I think it's important. It galvanizes people, and it'd be interesting to know how many people it converts. Though, are we just preaching to the converted, or is it actually converting people? Going, oh, I didn't think like that. There's lines in that, for instance, where I say, "Love thy neighbor." That's what the Bible said. Apparently, it says something like that in the Quran. I don't know. I'm not really that well read. And I kind of think, is that really that?
Well, there's a wonderful moment. There's a wonderful moment when you sang it in. We sang it in when we were in Australia in March, and we sang it at a festival in Victoria. And he got to one of the lines. Essentially, the message is equality, and he got a standing ovation. And people just stood up and they clapped. Must have clapped for about 5 minutes non-stop. And it's because there was a similar scenario that was actually just happened in the state of Victoria that didn't have a positive ending, didn't really have a positive message, and I think people can relate to it, though. I think
there's an importance there, but it's that worry, isn't it? It's that worry that you just say.
But you shouldn't doubt the fact that 1 million people gathered in Wenceslas Square in Prague and sang themselves into a republic. Yeah. They didn't sing loudly, they just stood shoulder to shoulder and they sang themselves into republic. And then the first president was a poet. So there is power there. It does break down barriers, and I'm glad that we're all trying to contribute a little to that and to scale that wall and somehow. And maybe we are preaching to the converted, but. You'll tell someone else, and they'll tell someone else, and by and by.
Maybe.
But even if you just, you may be preaching the converted, but even if you just get someone to just stop and think and reflect on their own situation or something that they might be able to relate to, it's a positive thing.
It's easy for me, isn't it? Because I'm, working in this art world to belittle and not quite understand the actual real concerns. I feel we're getting really serious now. The actual real concerns of people.
Well, you can empathise those 5 years that you were in the EDL.
Exactly, yeah. In fairness, yeah. I just hope my checkered past doesn't come up with me. Yeah.
Save it for the book.
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting point about this sort of idea of, are you a political group? Are you political songwriters? And for me, I never sort of want politics to come into it. I think that the songs that we like to sing and the songs we write are about stories, and I always think, well, hang on, I've never actually, we've got a song that's against honour killing. I've never actually met anyone who's in favour of honour killing. I've never actually met anyone who's openly, admittedly racist. So why are these songs called political? For me, they're just full of truth. So it's interesting to have that.
Politics is just people.
Yeah.
And people are just folk, and Louis Armstrong said, it's all folk music. I never did hear a horse sing. So, so it is all folk music. Stuart, are you shuffling your weight from foot to foot?
Are we all?
I think we need to finish, but it'd be nice for us to...
Should we sing with something a bit light? Should we have a song or something?
Do you want to
sing a song?
Lift your mic up, David.
Something really miserable.
Lift your mic up, David. Lift it. Do you only remember or something? Johnny, we were talking about that before.
No, it'll take 25% of our show off tonight.
All right, okay. What do you fancy?
What about the Manchester Rambler? You do that one, John? Could you lead that? Or?
I don't know. but it's a guitar thing. Oh, right. This is what we said we'd do.
We
We know exactly what we're going to sing. We're just pretending that.
We'll do that. Okay, should we do that? Okay.
We'll do a bit of Rolling Home.
Yeah.
But only if you sing to show unity.
We certainly are preaching to the converted here, because many of you tonight will be rolling home, I'm sure. So
it is a thinly disguised socialist anthem. Some get it and some don't. So see what you make of it. Round goes the wheel of fortune. Don't be afraid to ride. There's a land of milk and honey waits on the other side. There'll be peace and there'll be plenty. You'll never need to roam when we go rolling home. When we go rolling home, rolling home. When we go rolling home, when we go rolling, rolling, when we go rolling home. And the gentry in their fine array do prosper night and morn, while we unto the fields must go to plough and sow the corn. The rich may steal the power, but the glory's ours alone. When we go rolling home, when we go rolling home, rolling, when we go rolling home, when we go rolling, rolling, when we go rolling home. So pass the bottle round and let the toast go free. Here's a health to every laborer, wherever they may be. Fair wages now and ever, let's reap what we have sown. When we go rolling home, when we go rolling home, rolling home, when we go rolling home, when we go rolling, rolling, when we go rolling home. What an honour to sing with the young uns. Thank you.
Mr. John
John
Tams.
Tams.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much. Thank you.